Suspected serial killer Rex Heuermann is believed to have created a manual to plan his murders. The Word document contained instructions on body disposal and tips to avoid capture. In July of 2023, Heuermann was arrested and charged with the murders of 3 women. He was also named as the prime suspect in the death of another victim. During a search of his house, investigators found more than 300 electronic devices. These included computers, internal hard drives, external hard drives, phones, and pen drives. On one of the hard drives, they discovered a Microsoft Word document that Heuermann had deleted. HK 2000-03 was the original title of the file. However, he later renamed it to HK 2002-04. This document provides a shocking insight into his crimes, as it shows that he was a sadist who derived pleasure from torturing his victims. Sadly, these women went through a level of hell that most of us cannot even imagine. The manual was split into different sections. Under problems, he listed a number of things that could lead to his capture. This included DNA evidence, tire marks, and fingerprints. Interestingly, he also mentioned hair and witnesses, 2 factors that eventually led to his arrest. Judging by his point about MO, he placed some of the remains in plastic bags that contained cat litter. This was likely done to prevent leakages and mask any smells. Under supplies, he wrote a checklist of various items that he needed to commit the murders. Photo film is listed among the items. This suggests that he took photographs of his victims. DS means dump site. Here he states that Mill Road in Manorville is dump site number 1. This is significant as the dismembered remains of Gilgo Beach victims Valerie Mack and Jessica Taylor were found off Mill Road. Although dump site number 2 has question marks beside it, we now know that he chose to throw their heads and hands into the bushes near Gilgo Beach. Dumpster site likely refers to a dumpster that he used to dispose of other items, such as the victim's clothes and tools that were used during the murder. TRG refers to target. Target 1 is listed as Megan, which is likely the name of a sex worker that he was familiar with. It is unlikely that this was her real name, as most sex workers use aliases when meeting clients. I believe that TUNK is short for target unknown. He wrote the word black in brackets because he was toying with the idea of selecting a black sex worker. This may have been a girl that he had seen hanging around his usual pickup spot. It is also possible that he didn't have anyone particular in mind. The next section of the document focuses on preparation and cleanup. Here, he talks about scoping out the dump site, engaging the target, checking for security cameras, setting up his torture chamber, and destroying evidence. It appears as though he destroyed the photographs of the victims shortly after the murders. He also changed his tires. Notably, the police found tire tracks following the murders of Peaches in 1998 and Jessica Taylor in 2003. The section Recon Reports indicates that Heuermann counted the number of security cameras along 2 highways. The first was the Long Island Expressway between Route 112 and 110. The second was between Exit 30 and Route 231 on Southern State Parkway. When you look at these sections on a map, it appears as though he was planning a route between his house and Manorville. The last part of Recon Reports contains a phone number for target number 1. It is likely that this number belonged to a sex worker named Megan, who was listed in the target section. Under takedown and pickup, he reminds himself not to spend too much time in the same area. Before Craigslist became popular, he would have had to approach girls on the street. Therefore, it is likely that he circled the red light districts a number of times before he found a suitable victim. The next section is titled Body Prep. This section outlines steps to remove trace evidence and hinder the victim's identification. If the police don't know a victim's name, then they can't trace their last known movements, check video footage, or talk to potential witnesses. He also states that he needs to remove torture marks. At the time, he was likely concerned that these marks left an obvious signature. A dismembered body is one thing, a dismembered body with torture marks is another. Uermann also listed everything that he needed to get rid of. This included, among other things, his torture tools, what he had been wearing, his victim's belongings, and the HK Word document. When deleting the Word document, it appears as though he used the regular delete button instead of a file shredder. If you delete a file using the delete button, it will remain on the system until a new file overwrites the space that it occupies. In this case, it appears as though he stopped using the hard drive before that could happen. One of the most revealing sections is called Things to Remember. In this section, you'll notice that he uses the phrase next time. The first point shows us that he researched ways to make his basement more soundproof. If he could hear a bird outside, then he knew that it wasn't soundproof enough. The second point suggests that he made mistakes with a previous victim due to tiredness. This makes sense when you consider that he would have picked up most of these women late at night. The third point gives us insight into his MO. He would pick up a sex worker, bring them back to his place, and then attack them once they were inside. Despite his overwhelming size advantage, it appears as though he struggled to take down one of his victims. The fourth point is a combination of points 1 and 2. Playtime is when he tortures the victim for his own pleasure. The fact that he calls it playtime is a testament to how callous he is. He feels no empathy. In his eyes, these women are objects for his pleasure. The fifth point indicates that he tried attaching drop cloths to the basement ceiling using tape. However, the tape failed to hold them up. The final point shows us that he strangled his victims with a rope. Under notes, he mentions various phrases and pages from a book called Mindhunter, which was written by former FBI profiler John Douglas. Uermann was clearly an organised offender. His interest in organised versus disorganised suggests that he may have carried out certain acts in an attempt to mislead investigators. In other words, he wanted them to believe that he was a disorganised offender. Disorganised offenders often have mental health issues. They live alone or with their parents. They can also struggle to maintain employment. These killers are careless, as little or no planning goes into their crimes. If Uermann did attempt to paint himself as a disorganised offender, then it clearly didn't work, as the FBI profile outlined that he was intelligent, methodical, and cautious. This was obvious to most people, as the killer had gone to great lengths to evade detection. Look at the painting refers to victimology. Basically, it means that you can tell a lot about the killer by examining the victim and their background. For example, in this case, it was quite obvious that the killer was a man who had a long history of picking up sex workers, some of whom were allowed to live. Serial killers who target this type of victim tend to be regular Johns who are very familiar with the industry. They are a fish in water, so to speak. The fact that Uermann knew an escort named Megan indicates that he may have picked her up in the past. It appears as though he only killed when he knew that his family would be out of town for a significant period of time. If they were only gone for one day or one night, then he used the women's services as normal. It is important to point out that this was a plan. It represents a snapshot of what he aimed to do. Uermann was undone by the hairs that were found on his victims, even though he specifically listed hairs as a potential problem. His truck was also spotted on 2 occasions, despite his point about witnesses. Writing a checklist and actually following it are 2 different things. When you look at this planning document, you'll notice that there are a number of things that he didn't need to write. Certain points are so obvious that they don't really require a reminder. For example, he states that he should hit the victim in the head or neck next time. The fact that this document was so needlessly detailed shows us that this wasn't just a checklist. Serial killers tend to spend a lot of time fantasizing about their next victim. They will daydream about ways to improve the process and get more enjoyment out of the act. Fantasizing is a part of the cycle between kills. Uhrman had to wait a considerable amount of time between each victim. Therefore, it is likely that this document was a way for him to start actualizing his fantasies. In other words, when he started writing down notes and doing recons, it started to feel real. It began to feel as though things were finally in motion. Serial killers spend so much time fantasizing about their next murder that the act itself never lives up to their expectations. Following the murder, they often feel depressed, sometimes even suicidal. This isn't due to guilt or remorse. Instead, it is the realization that they may never be able to fully satisfy their urges. To get themselves through this low period, they sometimes take trophies or photographs of the victim. Uhrman likely kept photographs of the victims for a short period of time. That way, he could prolong his satisfaction and get himself through that down period. However, he also knew that keeping the photographs was extremely risky. Therefore, it is likely that he destroyed them within a matter of days or weeks. Uhrman's target section is vague. This is because he only had a relatively short window of opportunity. He needed to strike while his family were out of town. Sex workers are often transient. They can change spots and move between cities. They can suddenly leave and go back to their hometowns. Because of his experience as a John, Uhrman would have also encountered girls who failed to keep appointments. I believe that these might be the misleaders that he mentions under problems. Basically, he couldn't put all of his eggs in one basket. Although he had targets in mind, he couldn't really depend on them to be in the pickup area at the right time. He had to be much more flexible than that. The pickup section in his notes suggests that he took to the streets to find a victim. This makes sense when you consider that the document was created long before sex workers began advertising their services on Craigslist. It appears as though he deleted the file in 2004. In July of 2003, a dog walker discovered the remains of Jessica Taylor on an access road in Manorville. Taylor was the first dismembered Gilgo Beach victim to be identified. However, the news of her identification wasn't published until February of 2004, which was the same year that he seemingly abandoned the document. Uhrman frequently Googled his victims and kept abreast of developments in the case. Therefore, it is likely that he saw this news article. Picking up a newspaper and seeing Taylor's face staring back at him would have filled him with worry. If the police had a name, they could trace her last known movements and speak to witnesses. It is likely that he cleaned house after seeing this article. He would have spent the next few weeks and months worrying about police cars pulling up outside his house. In Taylor's case, he got lucky. However, luck does not last forever. 20 years later, he stepped out of his office building in Manhattan on a warm summer evening. As he strolled along the sidewalk, he thought about dinner or what TV show he was going to watch that night. Unbeknownst to him, multiple officers were lying in wait, ready to pounce. Rex Uhrman's victims had come back to haunt him.